Hi everyone, welcome to this week. A bit of a hodgepodge week. We're going to look at more uses of the relative pronoun. Some, kind of not entirely common, but worth knowing uses of the relative pronoun, and start to review cases. So the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative. All right. So we'll review relative pronouns. These are they on the left. Remember, these are the Q words in Latin. So qui, quae, quod, cuius, 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 etc. And that corresponds with the W word, or those correspond with the W words in English. So who, whom, which, that, whose, etc. Okay, remember that relative pronouns introduce what's called a relative clause. So the boy who fell over, right, cried. So who fell over is the relative clause. Who is the relative pronoun. Its antecedent, the word to which it refers, is boy. The W words in English, both relative pronouns and interrogative pronouns, those are the same words but used to ask questions, can be a little tricky because no matter the function of the relative pronoun, it will always come at the beginning of its clause, which is a little tricky. So if we look at this example here, video puellam quam cognosco, I see the girl whom I know. So whom is an accusative, so quam is accusative in Latin, whom is objective in English. But even though it's a direct object, it comes at the beginning of its clause, and that can pose problems, or at least confusion for English speakers, because we're very used to word order determining function as opposed to form. And with relative pronouns, the form determines the function rather than the word order, because it will always be the first word in its clause, or the second if it's after a preposition. So you can read over that rule. It's a good way to sort of it's a good rule to determine when to use who and when to use whom. So those were kind of relative pronouns in general. So our first kind of new use is what's called a connective relative, or connecting relative. And in many ways, this is similar to in English, where, as you see here, kind of starting a sentence with the conjunction and. Sometimes it's sort of akin to the difference between a semicolon and a period. So if you in English, if you use a period, in Latin you'd use sort of a demonstrative, a regular pronoun. In English, if you'd use a semicolon, in Latin you'd use this sort of connective relative. What the connective relative does is just make sort of a closer connection between the next sentence and the previous one. So you can see here in the example that quod, the connective relative, is the first word in the sentence, and technically with the way relative pronoun works, that should be difficult, if not impossible, to sort of pull off. But the idea is that it refers to something in the previous sentence and just creates a little bit of a closer connection. Up here with these equations, you can see what I mean about what the pronoun represents. So qui, right, this is of course the masculine, just represents kind of either a conjunction and a soft demonstrative, or one of the stronger demonstratives. So qui equals this man or he. Right, quae, of course, the feminine, same thing, equals, and this woman, or just this woman, and then, of course, the neuter, et, id, and hoc. Okay, so there's no real difference in structure. It's just kind of a way you translate the relative pronoun. So again, instead of starting the sentence, a relative pronoun that begins a sentence with a W word in English, you'd start it with just a regular pronoun. All right, so here are some examples. So you're going to identify the relative pronoun as a connective relative, or just a regular, relative. All right, and then these are from the exercise. So you've got quod caput versus quae semper. And an easy way to tell is that you can see that quod is right next to id. Id is its antecedent, and it's in the same sentence, whereas quae is the first word in a sentence, right, at that period. And so quod is going to be a regular relative, and quae is going to be a connecting, because it's that first word in the sentence. All right, so same thing in number 2. All right, so quo right next to its antecedent in the same sentence, quorum right after a semicolon. Semicolon, of course, and period functionally do the same thing. So quo is going to be a regular relative, and quorum is going to be a connecting relative. All right, I'll leave number 3. All right, and here's another example. All right, so same thing, quem, all right, part of the sentence, and then qui after a period. So quem is going to be a regular relative, and qui is going to be a connective relative. All right, our next use are two uses of the relative pronoun with the subjunctive. So a relative clause of characteristic at the top there, and then a relative clause of purpose at the bottom there. And so similar to the connective relative, where the relative pronoun stands in for another word or another combination of words, for the purpose clause, the qui is essentially going to replace ut. So when it says milites misit qui urbem caparent, the qui is essentially equivalent to ut he, right? So ut plus a pronoun, a subject pronoun that would sort of stand in for milites, the antecedent of qui. And so basically it's a regular purpose clause. It just creates a little bit of a closer connection between the two of them. So he sent soldiers to capture the city, or sort of whose job it was to capture the city, or who are to capture the city, something along those lines. It's a little tricky in English to maintain the subjunctive, the difference between a relative clause of purpose and a regular purpose clause, and you don't necessarily need to. But there you can see that standard purpose clause translation. Relative clause of characteristic, the idea is that a relative clause with a subjunctive verb rather than an indicative verb introduces a category of people rather than just an individual person or individual people. So the first one I should say here, sunt qui dicant. All right, so there's your subjunctive verb. There are those who say. There are the type of people who say, versus there's that one person who is saying, right? So that's the difference, is that there's that one person who is saying, that's the indicative, and that's a very definitive statement, versus there are those who say, there's this group of people who say, that's a much more sort of open-ended and uncertain group, and that's what the subjunctive indicates. All right, so this is a Latin tweet, and yes, there are people that tweet in Latin. It's actually a great way to sort of get some good Latin practice. But here's that same structure, right? So sunt qui, so there are those who, and then there's our subjunctive verb. So this is actually talking about people in Italy who don't want to pay for biodegradable bags, who are basically buying individual oranges to avoid paying for biodegradable bags. But there are those who don't want to, nolent. So there are those who don't want to pay for bags that are biodegradable or biodegradable bags. And Twitter, of course, erroneously thinks that it's French. All right, so here's an example for the relative clause of purpose. All right, so this is from Plautus. We've talked about Plautus. Underline the relative clause of purpose and then translate it. All right, so here is my relative pronoun, and then it's going to go the whole way. If I miss stuff on the right there, there's some stuff on my screen in the way that prevents me from writing on it. All right, so this is from Miles Gloriosus, a play about an arrogant soldier. So go palestrio and lead the sort of helpers, the adjutores. All right, and bring the helpers with you. All right, and so the helpers who, all right, are to carry all the stuff, the gold, the ornaments, the decorations, that's not quite the right word, the clothes, all the expensive stuff to the ship. All right, and again, you can either sort of go the more relative route, so go palestrio, and take with you the helpers to do all that, or who will do all that. All right, and so there's your relative clause of purpose in. All right, now shifting to this noun review, and there are a good number of slides here. I'll go through them relatively quickly because it is review, but take your time with them, especially if you sort of need it, if you want to kind of go through things a little more slowly. These are obviously the endings of all five declensions kind of laid out in a both horizontal and vertical way, and hopefully, and there's a next slide or two, we'll point some of these out. You can see some sort of horizontal patterns. We tend to learn the noun endings vertically by declension, but if you look at them horizontally across declensions, you can see some patterns in the endings that are useful for sort of keeping them in mind. So, for instance, an easy one is the accusative singular. The most non-neuters, or all the non-neuters and some neuters, are the characteristic vowel plus M, right? And so that's an easy way to remember the accusative singular. Just like the accusative plural, the non-neuters are the characteristic vowel plus S. All right, dative and ablative plural, some combination of is either by itself or with the bu in between, etc. So a good way to review and see some of those patterns. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you want to pause and read these are some good patterns to keep track of as well. All right. And at the bottom here, this memoranda part, just kind of some good general noun tips, identifying gender, or declension, I should say, things like that. All right, and so here are just some nominatives in action. We're looking at nominative, accusative, and vocative. All right, I use this one because it illustrates one of the kind of difficulties in overlapping endings. All right, so in both seals, we have this word concordia, which is a nice coincidence. The problem is in this one, it's a long A ablative, and in this one, it's a short A nominative, right? So in the University of Waterloo, peace along with truth, right? So that's that short A nominative. Whereas in this one on the right, St. John's in Shrewsbury, small things grow with or because of harmony, right? So Concordia and St. John's, the red one on the right, long A ablative. On the left here, Waterloo, short A nominative. So that's one of the tricky parts about Latin endings in general, but even just within a declension, this first declension, you've got to be able to tell those apart. And the only way to do context. All right, so just remember that third declension nouns will have variable nominatives, and some of those nominatives will look like non-nominatives. So this is the third declension noun, civitas, civitatis. That as can be a first declension accusative plural, but of course it's not here because this is a third declension noun, and this happens to be its nominative singular. So the state grows with commerce, with business. All right, similarly, this is of course Harry Potter. All right, Draco there is a nominative, could certainly be a dative or ablative in second declension, dative or ablative singular, but it is a third declension nominative, Draco, Draconis, or Draco, Draconis. And Titilandus agrees, all right, because they're both masculine nominative singular, as does Dormiens here. But Titilandus is perhaps the more illustrative agreement. All right, so shifting to the vocative, remember the vocative is the case of direct address. Excuse me, what that means is when we're talking directly to someone, we use the vocative. For most forms, the vocative is the same form as the nominative. There is no difference between the nominative and the vocative. For U.S. nouns of the second declension, all right, the vocative becomes E. For IUS nouns of the second declension, the vocative becomes IUS. So Marcus becomes Marque, Cornelius, oh, forgot the I there, becomes Corneli. All right, Cotuli, let's go Cubs. All right, Cotuli is that I ending because it's just the nominative plural, and so it's the vocative plural, and so it's the same form as the nominative plural. All right, and this is actually a tweet from a restaurant where I live, but can you pick up the mistake? Right, et tu Brutus. All right, that, of course, should be brute. And that's that US to E vocative that happens. All right, and then finally the accusative. Excuse me. All right, so the accusative's most common use is direct object. All right, so they, students, people, our students, whatever, will illuminate the earth, terras. Right, so direct object is the recipient of the action of an active verb. Now that accusative. All right, accusatives can also be used as objects of prepositions. You can see the preposition pair takes the accusative. So from Wash U in St. Louis, so through truth, power. All right, power through truth. All right, I forget which one this is, but I pursue, I sort of follow through to the destination, ad destinatum. Right, ad is another preposition that's accusative. All right, so this is Columbia. Remember that for neuter nouns, the accusative and the nominative will be the same. So we will see the light in your light, lumen, luminous, a neuter, noun of the third declension. All right, and veritas vos liberabit, the truth will set you free. This looks like an accusative, but is a nominative, and vos, the pronoun, is the accusative. All right, and let's move on to this with summatives. All right, so a reading from Cicero. So, accedat ut facilius animus evadat, ex hoc ire, eumque perumpat, quod nihil est animo velocius, nulla est celeritas quae possit cum animi celeritate contendere. All right. So it happens that accedat ut. Oh, let me get my little thing. So it happens that the soul escapes easily, more easily, from this air. All right, dot, 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 and it bursts through because there is nothing faster than a soul. There is no swiftness which is able to contend with the swiftness of the soul. All right, so I'll let you take the rest. All right. Oh, sorry. My fault. All right, identify the underlying words by case and function. All right, so the examples are not underlined word, it's accusative direct object. All right, so you're looking at these underlined words and identifying them by case and function. So for instance, undas, right? So accusative direct object. Puer Icarus, nominative subject. All right, Icare, vocative direct address. So this is part of the noun review. So some of these, most of these, I should say, will be pretty basic in terms of function, but it's a good way just to review those functions of the nouns. All right, that is all for this week. Thanks, and please email with any questions.